Hi, and welcome to Main Street AI, the podcast where traditional businesses are quietly revolutionizing their operations with artificial intelligence and winning. In this podcast, I sit down with industry leaders from law firms and professional services and other Main Street businesses to explore their AI journey. We dive into the opportunities they see, the challenges they're navigating, and the real impact of AI on their industries. Whether you're AI curious or ready to implement, this show brings you insights from leaders who are actually using this technology to serve customers better, empower employees, and drive profitable growth. What does it look like to run a 100-person virtual law firm, fully remote, mission-driven, and growing 30% year over year? Today's guest, Kate Lincoln-Goldfinch of Lincoln-Goldfinch Law, has been doing exactly that since COVID forced her hand in 2020. Kate is an Austin-based immigration attorney whose firm specializes in deportation defense, humanitarian cases, and keeping families together in one of the most politically charged practice areas in law right now. In this conversation, we talk about how she built a culture-first remote firm, where she sees AI reshaping immigration law over the next 5 years, and why, despite her team's growing fluency with AI tools, the human handholding at the heart of legal practice isn't going anywhere. Let's dive in. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Main Street AI podcast. This is Stephen Whittier with Satori Coach IO. Today, I'm joined by Kate Lincoln-Goldfinch of Lincoln-Goldfinch Law. Kate, thanks for joining.
My pleasure to be here.
Great. So just if you could give us a high-level overview of who you are, what you do, specifically with your firm.
Sure. I'm an immigration lawyer based in Austin, Texas. I've had my firm for about 10 years, and during COVID, we went virtual, and we've stayed virtual. So the majority of my team works from home, and we're spread out throughout the United States. And within immigration, we really focus on families, keeping families together, uniting families. And so we do a lot of detained work, deportation defense, humanitarian cases, and family-based cases. That's sort of our sub niche within the immigration legal field.
So that's interesting. Talk to me a little bit more about having a virtual firm. You're the second person only that I've spoken to so far that has that model. And, it may be you're used to it now, but that might sound still kind of radical for a lot of people. So can you talk about how you got there, how difficult that transition was, and what you would say to anybody else that might be even remotely thinking about something like that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, as I said, it was in COVID. At that point, I had about, close to 15 team members, and we were busting at the seams in our little office. And I had already had an architect develop plans to build out this, space behind the office. And COVID was coming at us, and I went out with my office manager and my husband, and it was a happy hour, and we were like, okay, what do we have to do to just send everybody home so that they can continue working? And so within a 48-hour period, we sent everyone home, and then it all just started clicking and working for us. I mean, we enjoyed working from home. My team enjoyed it. Clients were, slower to adapt, but got there. And so then what happened was, over the next year or so, we grew very quickly and we added to the team so that by the time the rest of the world was contemplating a return to office, we wouldn't have all fit. And, now I have over 100 people. That was just over 5 years ago. And we have the same office, the same footprint. So there's no way we could fit all those people back in that same office. But at the time it was like, maybe we had 20 people 9 months later, and it just wasn't going to work. So as I was, around a bunch of people saying like, oh yeah, I got to get my people back to the office. Everyone's more productive. You can talk about things more easily, or all the reasons that people wanted a return to office. To me, it just felt like, oh, I can't do that because I don't have the space and I don't want to deal with that particular problem. And so I leaned into the virtual model, and there's challenges associated with that for sure. It's harder to close new clients, that to build the trust with somebody virtually is a lot harder. Collecting documents can be more difficult. I mean, there are hurdles that we have had to overcome, but the benefits of running a virtual practice have outweighed the hurdles of running a virtual practice for me thus far. And we still, maintain our physical footprint, and we have a handful of people who work in the physical offices every day, but 90% of the team are remote. And, now 5 years after, COVID hit, I think a lot of people, even people who are lower tech generally in their lives, are more accepting of a Zoom call with their lawyer, or email submission of documents or uploading something to a portal, like all of those things that many of us hadn't done before 2020. Everyone, for some reason or another, has done something like that at this point, and they understand the benefit. It also helps in my practice area that a lot of my clients are very fearful of being out and about and on the roads. And so
Right. That makes
reaching them in their homes or on their break from work in a way that doesn't place them at risk is, it ends up being a win-win.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's really interesting. Um, and you're absolutely right. As far as COVID, that changed the entire paradigm. People that had never used Zoom before, all of a sudden Zoom exploded, and for sure, lots of changes. Do you think that that is, I'm curious too, do you think that that is something that is viable for more your particular area specialty with the immigration law, or do you think that's something that maybe attorneys who are in other niches within the legal industry would consider as well? I don't know if you'd say like there are certain nuances there which might preclude somebody from doing that based on a particular type of law that they practice.
I mean, I think that the only, type of law that requires in person is the signing appointment in an estate firm, or something like that, where you've got to have witnesses and you've got to have notaries. And so you make those appointments in person, obviously. But I mean, you can do litigation, you can do prep, you can do any kind of meeting, prepare your clients for trial. I mean, it can all be done virtually now. And I know that some people prefer to go into the office and the routine of that and the camaraderie of that. And it really is a personal choice. I personally love working from home in my own space and having the freedom to not have a commute. And I want to give that gift to my team members as well. And I think that, I have seen a lot of hypocritical thinking, I guess I'll call it, in people who run businesses where there's just this sort of assumption that if you can't lay eyeballs on somebody on your team, then they're taking advantage of you. And sure, of course that happens, and there's ways around that. But my experience has been that when you hire, really good people and you have a mission oriented company and they are tied to the mission and the values, and you give them freedom and autonomy in their work and you give them clarity around what the expectations in their role are, they really appreciate that. And I think that people who do jobs every day, they really appreciate that level of respect and freedom.
Mhm.
And I've heard from so many people who have said, like, they are offended by the idea that they won't work as hard or it won't work as well
Mhm.
if they're not physically in the office every day. And like I said, I really do think it's a personal choice, but if the assumption is that like the reason people have to come in is so that they actually do their jobs, I reject that from a philosophical level, but also from an anecdotal personal experience level.
Mhm. So I think something you said there is critical to that, like what might be the distinction between that being a major factor, meaning like people not working as hard when they're remote, versus your experience, is you said mission-based company.
Mm,
So culture, I think culture and mission would be the critical piece there. What
mhm.
is that for you? Like how have you defined that, and how have you made sure that the people, you've had significant growth with going from 15 to 100 with this model and
Mhm.
saving on a lot of overhead in the
Mhm.
meantime, which I'm sure is
Mhm.
really good. But how have you made sure that the team coheres and performs the way you'd like them to?
Well, one thing that makes it easy is the field that I'm in. The field that I'm in is one that people believe deeply in, one way or the other. People have very strong opinions around immigration law. And so people who are drawn to the practice area to work at the firm usually come already sort of pre oriented to the mission. So I think that that could be harder if you were in a business litigation firm. But what I think can help is to have, your origin story, your mission, your vision, your core values all really clear. and to hit on that stuff regularly. And I think that like core values is something that in corporate culture, it can be an exercise that we do, at some staff retreat, some quarter, and then we all work on it and it's a shared Google Doc and then we go on with our lives.
Right.
For me, I really sat down. I mean, it was actually a very difficult exercise for me, coming up with the core values of my law firm, because I knew that they were really my personal core values. I'm sorry, my dog is barking. So let me just.
No problem.
I did this exercise of what are the core values. I rolled them out to the firm, and then we infuse everything that we do with our core values. Every team meeting, every decision that we make, every firm meeting, it's just something that we talk about. And ours are commitment to excellence, integrity, in this together, passion, and justice. Those are our 5 core values. And so it's something that we talk about a lot. And then we also, celebrate the team and talk about the work that we do together. So monthly we have a firm-wide meeting where, we do shout outs and we pick an employee of the month based on the core values and peer nominations. And then we talk about our clients and we look at all the pictures of our clients who got their first green card or for their first work permit. We tell the story of them and how they got here and how all the team members who contributed, from intake to consultant to billing clerk to paralegal to admin assistant to attorney, and all the ways that all of the teams impact this person's life, and that we're tying everything that we do to the lives that we are changing. And that's why we're here. And we're remembering that the people on the other end of the call are, taking their kids to soccer practice too, just like we are. And they're, snuggling with their pets on Sunday morning, just like we are. And so really hammering on the humanization of the people that we are serving. And I think you can do that in any industry, and bringing that to what you're doing, so that, and frankly, if somebody, it doesn't resonate with that, they don't care, they really just want a paycheck and then clock out, they're not that interested in the mission of this firm, we are not a fit for them. And I don't want them here as much as they don't want to be here. And so being so clear about it that people select out is also, I think, really important when you're doing this, running of a business. Okay, now I'm letting my dog back in because now she's scratching the door. Here's working from home challenges.
I've been there too. No problem at all. Yeah, you're 100% right. It's as much about who is not a fit as it is who you attract, for sure. For people that might be your clients, I always like to ask, when I'm talking to attorneys, they're obviously not lawyers, and what would you be saying to them? They're not in your field. Main advice if they're thinking about getting an immigration attorney, because one of the things that is a recurring theme is, in some fields of law, advice will look something like, come talk to us before it gets to X point, which then is going to be more painful to sort of unwind your situation, whatever that may be. It may be, like you said, it could be business law, it could be trying to incorporate your business, or how you're going to structure yourself legally. But in this case, we're actually talking about your legal status and everything that's going on. What would you say to them to give them sort of proactive advice?
In this era, it's not it's obvious to people. If you are an immigrant in 2026 living in the United States, whether you are undocumented, whether you are in some type of process, you have a work permit, if you have anything but citizenship, the number one piece of advice that I have is to consult with an immigration firm that you trust about not only can you secure your status, but what's your safety plan going to be? How are you going to prepare and protect your children and your property should you get picked up off the streets? So the urgency just exists and does not have to be explained to anybody. And so the things that I caution people against, of course, are waiting too long to get the advice or going to the wrong person, because people talk so much about what they should do or who they should hire. And I see a lot of people go to form preparers or notarios. A notary public in the United States is somebody who just ordered a stamp online for 50
Mhm.
bucks. But a notario in Latin America is an elevated lawyer. And so there are people who take advantage of that confusion. And so, really, within the immigrant community, I think the risk is trying to save money or putting your future in hands of someone who is not an expert. And we try to make it. I mean, another thing that we do at my firm is this is not a money making venture. This is a community service project. And so we do a ton of outreach. I bought a bus last year as soon as the election happened, bought a bus and outfitted it, like did a whole renovation on the bus to go out into the community and provide know your rights materials and red cards and safety planning packets. And we've been doing free consultations ever since the election. We have these safety planning packets that people can use to collect all their documents. And so that's the other thing is accessing, providing the information, and that people access the information from a trusted source, and that you're doing diligence to prepare yourself. It's like if you lived in like rural California, in a place where wildfires happen, you're going to have fire insurance, and you're going to have a fire safe, and you're going to put your important documents in there, and you're probably going to think about what are you going to grab if you get a fire warning and there's a fire coming down the mountain. Well, you're going to get your photos, and you're going to get your pets, and you're going to get your estate plan, and you're going to get, there are things. There's like a list of things that you will grab quickly, and you've probably thought about that if you live in a fire region. It's like that, but for immigration. Just do the prep work and the planning so that you're not caught on the other side of an emergency with regret that you never thought about it.
Yeah, great advice. So I'll pivot over to talking about AI, emerging technology now. And how are you thinking about it? What sort of trends are you seeing right now in your field?
Yeah, I mean, I feel simultaneously oriented and engaged from an AI perspective, and also like miles behind the eight ball, So we use the LLMs, like we have the enterprise version of chat and,
Mhm.
Claude and all of that. And very early started, using it for marketing and drafting text. Of course, not blog posts that we put on
Mhm.
online, but, helping with marketing or drafting responses. One of the things that's been really helpful for us has been quality control from, using transcripts. So we have VoIP phone through Zoom, and Zoom will tell you, they use AI to tell you things within your call
Yes.
metrics, that like they have something called the sentiment score,
Mhm.
which can tell you in a conversation, which party is doing more of the talking. What's the general feeling of the conversation? Is there interruption going on? And so you can sort of gauge how your intake calls are going, how your customer service calls, and then you can even, get your transcripts and upload 6 months worth of intake transcripts, assuming you have protected access. So one thing with AI, of course, you always want to, as a lawyer, check your bar rules and have the type of subscriptions that don't share your client's data
For sure.
with the learning model. So you need to always do that. But once you do have that locked in, you can analyze from a macro level how things are going, but from a customer service level. I have not branched into doing human jobs with AI agents yet. I know
Mhm.
that there are intake agents and all of that do that. And I'm curious about that stuff. Part of the hurdle for me is that many of my communications are bilingual. And so that can
Mhm.
sort of, create a challenge. But I think another thing is that, it's important to protect your team and your people. And so as I consider this firm to be AI forward, and our IT team understands that, but also the whole team understands that we're not looking to replace people
Right.
with robots. We what makes us good is our attention to humans and our customer service, other than our legal expertise, and that requires humans. And so, to the extent we're able to reduce rote work of our humans at the firm, that is going to allow them to do more human interaction stuff. And so I also want to make sure that people aren't resistant at the firm to technological advancements or AI advancements because of fear of job displacement.
Mhm.
So, one commitment I have is that, like, I'm not looking to engage in job displacement with my people. I'm looking to allow them to do more high level work when I get solutions in place. But I'm not on the forefront of adopting AI agents to do human work. I'm still sort of watching and considering all of that. And I don't know you're the expert here. Like, where would you place me on the spectrum of AI adoption? I don't know, probably squarely in the middle or something like that.
No, I would say you are still in early market, right? So
Uh-huh.
there. This comes up quite a bit in conversation. I just was speaking to a consultant actually who works with attorneys last week, and he was very aware of what I was referring to. But there's a what's often called a technology adoption curve or a product adoption curve, and
Mm-hmm.
you'll see it go like it's got the hump, and then it goes down. It's almost like a roller coaster. So at the base, there's always the innovators, early adopters. Then you'll have early market. Then you start to go down the other side of the slope, and you'll have late market and laggards. And I always
Mm-hmm.
joke like laggards is like grandma just got a social media account in 2025. Like just got a smartphone. So that's where those are the people that are always the mentality. And there's a lot of this in professional services just based on the nature of like how these businesses are traditionally, but there's a lot of kind of laggard oriented people where they say like, I want to see what everybody else is doing before I make a move. But
Mm-hmm.
that's when we see some massive sea change, that's when the opportunity gets lost. So the
Yeah.
fact that you're already starting to be thinking about these things and starting to gain a little bit of conversation, if not fluency, then at least you're conversational early
Mm-hmm.
is very
Mm-hmm.
important because there's no question this is here to stay and it's going to continue to evolve and everything's going to move. But my 2 cents is you're spot on in terms of empowering your team there to be thinking about how to use it not to replace people, but the sort of now famous quote, I'll paraphrase it instead of trying to get it exact, but I believe it's technologist Peter Diamandis who said, it's not AI that will replace you, it's somebody who's using AI that will
Mm-hmm.
replace you, right? So
Mm-hmm.
this is really the point is you're going to have to use it. Better to start early and understand where it's going, but it should be there to empower, even if the jobs descriptions are going to shift a little bit. That's going to be inevitable, like with any new technology. But how are we using it to actually empower our people? And as you said, that's to do the higher level work where you can focus more on the human component that
Yeah.
is going to, I don't see replaced anytime soon. So very
That's
good.
comforting.
Do you see any, or rather, let me rephrase. Do you have any kind of ideas just based on your gut feeling about where things are going to move? Say, if you were to fast forward 5 years from now, certain things that might look much different in your field versus what will be the same. Do you have any
Well,
ideas?
there's the political world and the technological world when you're talking about my practice area. So five
Right,
years
right.
from now,
Politics, of
hopefully,
course, can shift for sure.
we
Mhm.
have a different environment, and there's, I don't know, some type of immigration reform and people are, eligible for something versus trying to keep their families from getting separated and detained. Because I think that as long as we're in the era that we're in, which is an era of detention and deportation, um, we need attorneys to litigate and go to court and represent people and all of that. But generally, when we're not in such an anti-immigrant time period, a lot of immigration looks like affirmative filings, and so the initial assessment of someone's eligibility, like, are you a dreamer? Do you have a student visa? Or can you get a work card? Or, can you get a green card through family? Like, all of that analysis in 5 years will be able to be done by the robots, of course. And then what documents do you need and how do you index them and prepare them or draft a written argument? All of that also can be done by the robots with, of course, quick review by a human. And so I think that the process of identifying what you can do and preparing it and submitting it will, the needs of having the humans do that will go away. But the part about helping people understand when and what it looks like and what to do in the meantime, and can I get a divorce right now, or if I get a divorce, what happens, or I'm nervous about flying and am I safe to fly, and all the in between hand holding that occurs with someone who's in a life-changing process. I mean, you might have a bot that they can chat with about that, but actually having a person who does this on a day in and day out basis and has, experience with it and can talk you through it and help you with your feelings around it. It's almost like the therapy side of the practice of law. And much of law is like this, when we're doing, helping someone dissolve their business partnership or get a divorce or, go for an immigration case. It's like they are contemplating and going through a major life change. And the hand holding of an expert is much of the value that a lawyer provides. And I think that hand holding is always going to need to be there. But the actual preparing and submitting of an application will, I mean, very little human, I think, input will be needed in 5 years with that part.
And I think you're absolutely right about this has come up quite a few times on the conversations I've had on this podcast with that human element and the actual, there's a consultative element, there's a human empathetic element, and I'm not an attorney obviously, but even in my own experience I've had an experience having to do with somebody who, he and his family are very important to me, that I wish they had somebody like you, because this was years ago, but he wound up having to he came over, did everything right, was had a work visa, was pursuing the green card, and he and a number of other people were actually defrauded by an attorney who wound up going to prison, but that didn't help him. Wow. His kids were back, and basically the story was every single year as years were going by and he was separated from his children, he and his wife were over here, but the children were back with the grandparents, and they were like, we can't keep going on with our kids. No, this year the green card's coming through. And it was always an assurance. Finally went so many years, and they just said, first she went back and then couldn't get re-entry, and then finally he said, this isn't going to change, I'm going to go back. It was the year after he went back that this person who was representing him, and I can't remember how many other people, it was a disturbing number, wound up being indicted and then ultimately going to prison. So, but he was doing his best. He got somebody he thought, at the time he could afford, but absolutely could have benefited from talking to somebody like yourself, who
Well, and I'll just
really
say,
advocate.
yeah, I mean, anybody listening, if you know someone who's in the middle of a story like this, get a second opinion. I mean, it's just like medicine. Like, you get a cancer diagnosis and you kind of don't really trust what the doctor's telling you because they want you to, like, cut out your organ or something. Like, you'd go to another person. Same deal with law. Don't just, assume because somebody, like, went to law school and took the bar that now they know what to do, what's best for you in your life. Like, seek a second opinion, because it's just heartbreaking, Stephen, to think about your friend and all the time they lost with their kiddos. It's like, it's almost impossible to even contemplate because that is so precious.
Yeah, it was absolutely brutal. I still miss him. It was like 12, 13 years ago, but it did have a happy ending, and they're all doing well, but even so, that's a huge cost. You're absolutely right. I'll pivot over to talk a little bit more about your business. One thing I always like to ask is, and I already got some inklings around this, but what would you say there's multiple immigration attorneys around, but what would you say you do uniquely well that sets you apart from others?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have touched on it. It's the care and the concern for people and their families, and treating our clients just like they are us, and it's not a, this is not a firm where the main goal is to make money. I mean, when I started my practice 10 years ago, three things were important to me. By that point, I had worked in corporate, I had done a lot of jobs, I had had a lot of experience. And number one, I wanted a non toxic work environment where people were happy to be there every day, because we spend a lot of time at work. And that, of course, translates to the clients. The second thing was that I wanted to be known for really elevated, high level legal expertise, not just sort of routine cases. We take the tricky cases, the case that other people have lost, the appeals. And then the third thing was client experience, communication, proactive communication. And I'm happy to say that, that the clarity around what I wanted allowed me to attract people who also wanted that and who believe in that same mission. And so that's what everybody does at LGL, and that's what sets us apart. And of course, the community engagement. I've done a lot of, I mean, just personally, I do a lot of education, social media. I do several videos a day with updates on immigration. So I just ran for office. I lost, but talking about elevating the conversation around immigration within Texas politics. So also just there's this business of actually representing people who are trying to keep their family together, and then also personally for me, there's this mission of elevating the conversation around immigrants and their contribution to this country. Because when you look at, the arc of history of our nation, there are periods of racist, xenophobic, anti-immigrant sentiment that always come after periods of expansion and diversity. Like after we completed the Transcontinental Railroad, and, in the early 1900s, and these periods where we have this great economic growth, achievement, diversity, and then a snapback against the immigrants who made all of that possible. And we are in a very acute moment like that. And so we need, I think, as quickly as possible to get ourselves back to a rhetoric around immigration being a good word in this country. And so I just, from a personal perspective, that is, that and being a good mom and a good person are like my life's work. So infusing that into what we do for our clients, I think sets us apart too. I mean, a lot of immigration lawyers share a strong mission for the work that they do. I'm not alone in that. But it's certainly relevant for me in my practice.
And then just in terms of your growth trajectory, so obviously you told us like in the last 5+ years you've had really significant growth, even using this fairly unique model. Like not too many attorneys are using it with the remote work. What stage of growth would you say that your firm is in right now, and where are you looking to get to in the next year or so?
I mean, I don't, you'd have to give me the stages, and then I could tell you where I fall, like, because I think it depends upon like what framework we're using. But essentially, I've had rather steady growth year over year, and I like that better. I prefer that to stagnation and then rapid growth because it's chaotic.
Probably be like a stability phase. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I mean, what I prefer, I like, I think it's exciting to have 30% growth year over year from a top line
Hmm.
revenue
Oh
perspective,
yeah.
because it's like you're still changing and innovating and breaking and fixing, but you're not like exhausting everybody. Um, and so that's what I go for. That's what I've been, with some fluctuations, that's what we've mostly been able to do. And then, as you grow, the part that I really love about it is when you get to the point where you have people in the positions that is, niche to their zone of genius. So now I'm at a point where I get, my leadership team is probably 10 people, and each of them oversee a department, and they're really solid in their departments, and the people on their teams are really solid. So you don't have like the one really smart guy who's doing, HR and IT and parts of finance because, just out of necessity. When you're at a certain place of growth, people are wearing a lot of hats, and that I think can lead to burnout and exhaustion. And so getting to the point where you're hiring really smart expert people for the specific job that they are doing, is very relieving when you can finally arrive there.
Yes, absolutely. Takes a lot of the burden off of you as the business owner trying to
Yes.
manage things that are not in your domain of genius. When it comes to any challenges, constraints to growth, I always like to say if you could wave a hypothetical magic wand and fix one thing in your business that might be a bottleneck or a constraint, what would that be?
I don't know. I don't know that I have a one. I mean, I would say my consistent pain point has been my sales funnel in various stages, of the funnel. So whether it's like intake, I'm getting too many leads in that aren't qualified for services, or my intake team is not setting enough appointments, or tomorrow it'll be the appointments that we're setting aren't showing up, or the people that are showing up aren't hiring quick enough, or the people that are hiring, it's like, so I would say the steps down the sales funnel need constant attention and repair and fixing. And sometimes it's, seasonal. Sometimes it's political. Sometimes it's some marketing campaign got broken. But it's like all of these things need constant attention and recalibration, and they all impact revenue in a way that can be very stressful when you've got, a large payroll. And so that part I have is one of my least favorite problems, is the instability within the sales funnel. And then another least favorite problem that I have is when people depart unexpectedly. And that doesn't happen to me a lot. But when it does, it's hard. When you run a practice where it isn't just a business and you care very deeply about your team members and their well-being, and then they leave and it turns out like they weren't okay and you didn't know it. To me, I'm able to forgive myself for a lot of errors. But when I didn't see it coming that someone wasn't happy, I take that as a personal failure that's hard for me to overcome. So those are two that I would gladly discard each of those challenges as an entrepreneur and work on other ones.
Right, right. I think those are challenges that are very common for a lot of business owners. So, how can people reach you? What's the best way to reach out if they want to find out more about your services?
So probably the easiest way to just find me on socials is on Instagram. It's Attorney Goldfinch. And then my full name is Lincoln-Goldfinch. So my firm is Lincoln-Goldfinch Law. So you Google me and find me in all the places. And I do a weekly show. Actually, when I'm doing that right after this, live, where I do update. It's in English on Tuesdays and Spanish on Thursdays. So anybody who's curious about what's happening in the world of immigration and wants to keep up with all the changes and headlines, but doesn't have time, I would invite you to follow me, because I do explainer videos on everything that happens and keep them short and simple.
Excellent, very good. Last thing I'll ask you is, I always like to end on the personal. I have a pretty good feeling based on everything you said, but just let you kind of say it in a nutshell. Aside from business, what is your main motivation for what gets you out of bed to do this every day?
Yeah, I mean, I got into this work in law school. I speak Spanish and I wanted to use my Spanish, and I signed up for the immigration clinic. Very naive, having come from Austin and just believing that this was a country of immigrants. And My first assignment was to go to a detention center for families and to represent a family detained there with a little baby. It was a mom, a dad, and a little baby, and they were all in prison uniforms. And the mom asked me if I'd sneak her baby out with me and take care of her until they could get out of this jail. And that was like the moment my life changed. I realized the way we were treating immigrants, I couldn't believe it. And it, this like passion that I have for it only strengthens the more people that I meet, the more stories that I hear of immigrant journeys and why people come and what they went through and who they are and what they're up to. I have such a deep admiration and appreciation for people who choose that journey. And I think we all should. We really all should. And so the more that I see rhetoric, coming down on immigrants or acting as if just by virtue of wanting a better life, someone is therefore a bad person, it only fuels the fire for me to keep going. And there's a lot of work to do. We got a long way to go right now.
Well, thanks so much for your insights. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Great. Really appreciate it. Take care.